Okay, first up is Mitchell, and yeah, this is looking good. Obviously, you got all the basics in there, and then you've gone beyond as well. I think the proportions are pretty good. I would tend to say maybe a little thin going this way. I think the head would be a cube. You can get some additional images of this. I'm just gonna do a search for Smoking Spaceman toy robot and do images search, and you can see it from different angles, and this is a pretty good example of, you can see the thickness on the head here. It's about cube shaped, so about as deep as it is wide. So I'd make these a bit wider or deeper, I guess I would say. One way to do that is to right mouse click on it and choose vertex. Then I can marquee select these vertices and then W for move and then pull it back. And then repeat for this one, right mouse click, vertex, marquee select those vertices and then pull it back, maybe to there. And then right mouse click object to get back into object mode. Did you group these arms? You did. Just good. So then you would move these back as well to recenter that and these things. And obviously doing it on both sides. F for frame selected, shift select this, we can move these back, etc. You get the idea. Yeah, make sure you're looking at the image. This is a little high maybe, and I think it's an interesting choice to try to use the helix, but I think it's it's a good idea really. But I think it does that thing at an angle. It'd be interesting is to take like a lattice and see if you could sort of straighten that out. I wonder if that would work. I'm just going to have less influences here. Oh, you have to have at least two, huh? Why does it seem like there's... Oh, not influences, sorry, divisions. There we go. Right mouse click, lattice point, and take these top points here and see if you can kind of straighten that out. That kind of works. That might be an interesting approach for this. Anyway, and if you use a lattice, then you should delete history afterwards. Edit, delete by type, history, or Alt-Shift-D, and that'll get rid of the lattice. And then, place that there. I think there's more of those humps than that, but that could be an interesting approach for it. Okay, yeah, good work. I think I was calling you by your last name, which is Mitchell, and your first name is Griffin, so apologies for that. I think I was just looking up here and it looked like first name, last name. So anyways, apologies, Griffin. Next up is Martin, and first thing is just the file name. Just be real careful about naming it with your name included, because you can imagine, if I had a whole folder full of things called robot or robot2, it would be a little confusing. So make sure you include your name and the assignment number in the names of the files you turn in, just to help things stay organized. And notice you have X-ray on. I'm just going to go shading X-ray and turn that off. And yeah, it looks like you did all the basics here. I think the body's going to be a bit thicker, as I was showing before. If you do an image search for a Smoking Spaceman toy robot, you can get a lot more views on this character, and here's a pretty good example of where you're seeing, and they're not all exactly the same, but they're close enough. So you can see how thick that side is, and I would say this is about a cube, meaning that the height and width and depth are all about the same distance. Yeah, but again, you've got the basics in there. That's great. Not too much more to say on this one. Just keep going with the instructions on the next module. Okay, this is Christy, and yeah, again, you've got all the basics looking good. Thinking maybe the feet could be a little bit bigger, a little longer maybe, and a little taller, and maybe a little wider too. Also, yeah, maybe just a touch wider, because we're going to kind of need that when we round it off on top. You're going to kind of need that extra space. I can show you, you know, you'll see this again in the module, but I think I do these first. I just did right mouse click, edge, and then marquee select through it just to get those 4 edges there. You can see, and then shift right mouse click and bevel edge, and these are going to be a pretty big, lots of segments. And you see how that kind of, you know, cuts the corner there. Let's see if we can select this on top. I'll just deselect these, and again shift right mouse click, bevel, and I can adjust the size of that and the number of segments. So you see, it's in a way, it's like you sort of need a little bit of extra size because the corners are going to be rounded and cut off there. Something like that. But yeah, it's coming along well. Keep going. Okay, this is Kobe, and yeah, interesting, kind of different approach for the arms. You put these extra kind of middle pieces for those seams in there. I think that's looking pretty good. I think it gets a little tricky on this area where some of these are overlapping. Maybe you can either get this one a little bigger here or just lose it. I'm not sure. But yeah, or maybe thinner really. I think these could be maybe thinner too. We look at some of the images. I know this is different from the one in the picture, but it's pretty similar. Or look at that one as an example, but this looks real thin to me, that line in the middle. And if we go back to your thing, it's a little, relatively, it's a bit thick, I think, so maybe go a little thinner on that. And yeah, and the feet look a little bit tall. Yeah, I tend to like to have these, I'm just holding down D. It's going to give me, I'm looking for like a little align thing. There we go. And that way, when you scale it, it'll, you know, stay there. So maybe more like that. And I think it's equal front and back as well, so you know, it could be a little bit longer, but it has the same amount in front as it does behind. And again, that's the kind of thing you'd only see, you know, if you look at it from a different angle. Although that one's not like that. So I guess it could be however you want. Actually, a lot of these aren't like that. I'm sure I've seen some that have more overlap on the back. But yeah, maybe not then, because it's looking like most of them don't. Anyway, but yeah, it's a good start. So yeah, I think make these seams thinner and then adjust the feet and keep going. Okay, this is Tegan, and yeah, I can see Tegan's gone well beyond the module, which is good. I think everything that's here is looking pretty good. The feet maybe a touch thicker, a little more height maybe, and I think that these shoulders probably don't overlap this top edge so much, so maybe scoot those down a bit. Did you group those? No. It can be a good idea to group these. Like if I select all these and do Control G, see it puts it in a group right there. We can call that like, you know, left underscore arm underscore group, something like that. And then you can center the pivot if you want. Modify center pivot. Scoot it down a little bit, that kind of thing. But yeah, good progress, and I think that some of the ways you built some of these things are going to make it a little tricky when we get to beveling, because you sort of want this to be one consistent piece so you can do the bevels. But we'll see that all in the next module. So you might end up replacing some of the pieces on here just to make it easier to work with later. But it's good that you went ahead and kept building. So this is Donald, and the first thing I noticed about this file is you may notice things look a little odd, and one is if you look down here it says side view, but it's not. It's been moved to where like it's at an angle. And one thing, the side view is an orthographic view, and one thing about the orthographic views are that they have no perspective, meaning things don't get smaller as they get further away. And one place you can really see that is this grid. You know, the grid's not showing any perspective. That makes it obvious. Let's see what happens if I go to View, Default View. There we go. That turns it back into the side view. Then if we want perspective, we'll just hold down the space bar, click in the middle, Perspective View, and then release. Oh, and there's a big sky dome light in here. Okay. Just deselect that. Okay, so now we're back in this view. And those green things, just so you know, are normals. I think I can get rid of them with Shift right mouse click, polygon display, toggle face normals. Yes, okay. That's kind of no. I'm just going to hide that. Control H. So see these kind of what I call artifacts, these kind of sparkly things happening here. Oh, jeez. How many different things have that on? A lot of them. It's really everything except for the one I turned it off for. So I'll select all those, Control click this one, Control click that one, right Shift right mouse click, toggle face normals. There we go. Okay. Now this is actually this is a pretty good example of something you guys might run into the next module. So he's gone around and beveled things, which is good to kind of get ahead there. However, there's a mistake in how this one's beveled, and you'll notice how it kind of, see how it doesn't look round anymore? It's kind of straight and flat, and then a round thing, and then straight. And that's because he beveled these things, and there's a lot of extra edges here that aren't necessary. There's also some sort of wackiness going on there. So it is possible, it's a little tricky to step this back, but if I go into the attribute editor, and I can actually select the bevel itself, so I click on the bevel tab and hit select and then delete, and now this is a surface without a bevel. So when I do want to bevel the surface, rather than beveling everything, what I want is just this edge here. So I'm going to right mouse click, go to edge, double click, and see it gets just that edge. Now I'll bevel, Shift right mouse click, bevel edge, and then I can adjust the fraction and the segments. Okay, and can you see the difference? See these kind of funny ridges and those artifacts in the middle, and then see this isn't. That you still see somewhat faceted edges here, but that's you know, just kind of the nature of it looking you know, rough versus smooth. So 3 is smooth, but then that messes up this other edge. And what we can do to fix that is if I do Control Shift X and put in what's called a holding edge. So I just click here, and now just right mouse click, object mode. Now I hit 3 and it kind of holds that edge. And I think this is going to intersect the body anyway. Did you group these? No. Center pivot, modify. I did Control G for group, modify center pivot. closer. So yeah, you'd want to do that. So really you want to get rid of the bevel on, well, any of these kind of cylinder type objects. So yeah, I think I like what you've done here. It looks like you've you know, made a pipe and then got rid of a section and then closed the edges. So that's working out really well. It's a nice technique. I think these you can go a little rounder on, and you'll see in the next module how I do two separate bevels. Actually, I did at the beginning of this video too. One that's much more round in the front, and then a smaller one for the top. Yeah, and again, you've got bevels, but you've got it on the whole thing, and you really want to just pick which edges you want to do it for. And then also, it's too thin if we, you know, looking at other images of this, you can do a Google image search for Smoking Spaceman toy robot, or just Smoking Spaceman robot. And you can see how much thicker he is. There's after you've beveled, there's a trick about scaling stuff. So you notice if I scale it now, see how it's sort of stretching out the bevel, and the bevel doesn't look right anymore? So you have one of two choices. You can get rid of the bevel, then scale it, and then add the bevel back in. And I showed you how to do that. Control A for Attribute Editor, select the bevel in the tab, hit select, and then delete, and then it turns it back into that. So then I can scale this up, and now I can do a bevel. I've been doing shift right mouse click bevel, but that's only for when you have a edges selected. But if I do Alt, it's not Alt B, is it? What is bevel? Oh, Control B, sorry, Control B, and then adjust the fraction and the segments. Something like that. So the other option, if you want to keep the bevel on there, is if I right mouse click, go to vertex, and I take those, see I have the bottom ones too, and I hit W for move and move them, and see what's happening is that the bevel is staying consistent while the the spaces between change size. So that's kind of the other approach for dealing with that, something that's already been beveled like that. Okay, yeah, good. So again, you might have to take a step back on some things, getting rid of some bevels so that they're done properly moving forward. Okay, this is Elias, and yeah, you've got all the basics in there. I think the it's looking a little thin from the side. If we compare that with some other images of it, here I've done a search for Smoking Spaceman toy robot, and got all these different views of the same character, and this one I think gives you an idea of how thick it might be. So yeah, I would make that a bit thick. So this and this, I can just scale those out like so. Though then you're gonna have to move these forward as well. But anyway, just to get the idea. And I think these could be a little bit wider this way, and a bit taller too, a bit thicker. Yeah, but other than that, you've got the basics coming along, so it looks good. This is Melissa, and this is a bit of a different approach to this one. Yeah, you can see there's this whole complex mesh shape, and I think that it's great to kind of experiment with these other approaches. But I think you have some disadvantages here, like to get these kind of real circular shapes at each of the joints is going to be difficult here. And yeah, I mean, you've got it kind of rounded this way, but if we look at the reference, like this, for example, you can see how it's rounded around this way as well, or really any of these. You can see that shape there. So I think on some of these things you're going to want to take a step backwards. And I also, as a general kind of rule, so see how everything's kind of connected? On an organic, continuously shaped character, that can be a good thing, but on something like this, it can be a disadvantage. What I tend to say is, if you think about how the character was assembled and the pieces that it's built out of, that use that as your guide for each piece being a sort of a separate shape. And don't make one continuous shape. So certainly, this kind of grill for the mouth is separate from this sort of T thing is separate, which is separate from the head, and so on and so forth. So kind of like a car, if you look at how a car is assembled, you could build the door panel separate from the fender, which is separate from the hood, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of separate pieces. And then you get the kind of natural seams that you would expect to get, like this little kind of box here is a separate piece from this little box, is a separate piece from that little switch. So it's kind of a good approach to mirror how it was built in reality. So kudos for kind of pushing the envelope and trying something, a little bit different and more advanced. But as you watch the next module, you might want to kind of back out of some of these things and do at least some of them more the way that they're demonstrated in the videos. Now this is Alina Greenidge, and before I go on, I just wanted to point something about your submission. So when I tried to open the file, it gave me an error, and it says .ma, but I had to change the extension to .mb to get it to open. So when you go to save your file save scene as, it'll automatically change the extension here to the correct one, whether you use my ASCII or my binary. So just set it for my ASCII and then leave it as .ma when you do that. I think that you did a my binary but then changed the extension, and that was sort of confusing. But that aside, yeah, I think this is looking pretty good. I think, like many of the others, I think you'll find that this and this piece could have more depth to it if we look at some of the more images. This is from a search for Smoking Spaceman robot, and you can see the depth there, so you may want to make those bigger. And yeah, it looks like you went ahead. We'll be doing some of these differently on the new module. You're sort of missing the kind of thickness along the top here. Yeah, we'll do some of these things a little differently. So you might want to step back out of a few of them to do them the way they'll be demonstrated in the module. But it's good that you go ahead and try to push it a little further than the module says, because you learn a lot that way. So yeah, good work. I would stay away from NURBs generally. We're going to stick mostly to polygons here. This is Gabrielle Maynard, and yeah, this is coming along pretty well. You've gotten pretty far with it. There's a few things we're going to do differently. I think you've built the feet, for example, out of cylinders, and it's going to be really difficult to get the shape we're going for starting with the cylinder. You're really going to want to begin with a cube. The other thing is I can tell right away that surfaces like this and this were built with booleans, and I'm just really not a big fan of booleans because it makes these weird edges here that are just kind of difficult. So it's, conceptually it's not a bad way to do it, but the result in Maya is that you get these kind of strange diagonal edges which aren't so great. So I try to find other ways to do them besides Boolean, and you'll see that in the next module. So yeah, cubes for feet, see if we can build these without Booleans. But I like that you've already added a bunch of extra stuff, so moving ahead. I think these will be more spheres, these eyes. But anyway, yeah, it's looking good, and continue on in the next module. Okay, this is Cody, and it's nice to see everything carefully named. That's really good. Little feet look a little, maybe a bit too wide, and could probably be a little thicker this way. And then the body and the head could be a little thicker as well in that direction. But yeah, besides that, it looks good. You've got all these good basic shapes in there. So yeah, there's more we cover in the next module, so you can just continue on with that. Okay, this is Megan, and it looks like you've got everything that was covered in the module. I just might make these guys a little thicker to kind of match the... This is another angle on the same or a similar character, which is called the Smoking Spaceman. And you can see that it's kind of cube shaped, where it's about as deep as it is wide and tall. Same with the head. So make that stuff a bit thicker. But yeah, I don't think there's too much to kind of discuss on this one, but just, keep on going with the next module. Okay, this is Angela, and again, yeah, we've got the basics in there. As I said with the last one, maybe a little bit more depth to these to kind of match it to this reference. You can see another angle on this of searching for Smoking Spaceman, and you'll get a lot of images of this robot to see it from different angles, and they're not all exactly the same, but they're close enough that you can get a better idea of the proportions. But yeah, this is looking good, and so just keep going with the material in the next module. Okay, next up is Henri, and yeah, you see you've kind of gone ahead. I like what you've done with the seam here. It's nice and thin, and I think it does a pretty good job of matching the reference image. Here you can see how thin that seam is, which I think is pretty well done on your character. You might adjust some of these things as we go into the next module, but maybe making this and this a little thicker. Maybe I gotta grab that too. And if I do that, then I have to move all these guys out a bit if you want to keep those consistent. But yeah, this is all coming along well. These all, it's just got the materials in it. Okay. Yeah, it's looking good. So yeah, just keep going with the instructions from the next module. Okay, this is Dwi, and here's another one where you've gone beyond the instructions, which is fine. I might take these guys and kind of overlap that a bit more. And I think as mentioned on a lot of if you compare some other reference of the same character, you can search Smoking Spaceman and Google image search, you can see the depth here. So I would scale that up. So, and of course then you'd have to move this other stuff forward as well. Something like that, but we'll do these things a little bit differently in the next module, and just check your proportions. Like that maybe looks a little bit small, and check it up against the image. Again, I mentioned this earlier that doing these with cylinders, it's going to make it really hard to get the shape we're going for, so those should just start out with cubes, and then when we bevel them, we'll get the roundness on those, which you'll see demonstrated in the next module. So yeah, good work. And then you might have to step back away from, like I would redo that and probably redo these, so you'll have to go to earlier version or delete those and replace them before you move forward.